So, I mean, absolutely. That's First Amendment right. I think that people are completely misinformed about how the flag was, like what the flag, like what it's, like how the war started. It's kind of evolved into like a racial thing when really it was not started as a racial thing at all. And I think that like it should absolutely be flown, like,
Okay.
like publicly.
Any other opinions as far as agreeing with him or disagreeing with him? Okay, Mr. Justice.
You do have a right to fly it. I do not think it should be flown on public property, like in front of a state house. You can also fly it at protests. But he mentioned misconceptions. There are no misconceptions about that flag.
And if you want to go to the person who would have the best read on what the flag meant, how about the person who created the flag? And what he had to say was, as a people, we are fighting to maintain the heaven-ordained supremacy of the white man over the inferior or colored race. If we ain't fighting to keep slavery, then what the hell are we fighting for? There is no question about what the Civil War was about. And there is no question about the monuments to that war, because every person that is lionized in those monuments may have been brave, they may have been strong, they may have done incredible acts of courage on the battlefield, they killed other people, and maybe they gave their own lives, and they did it so that they could own other human beings like chattel.
All right. Can I have like 3 examples of what else the Civil War was about that was not slavery?
This isn't an argument about the Civil War.
I just feel like that's a legitimate question since the Confederate flag came from the Civil War. I feel like that's a legitimate question. What else does it stand for? Like, what specific states' rights issues are you talking about? And like, how do you feel like you're being pushed? In what ways are you being pushed that you feel the need to fly the Confederate flag? Like, personally.
Just say states' rights. Remember that as we talk about our history, because that man learned from what we have done in the past. People think that the South lost the Civil War. They lost the war, but they won the peace.
So what do we say to people who say that they find the flag to be insulting? In what way does that stand? Like, in here, who finds does anybody in this room find the flag insulting?
And little cute, clean, starched black kids began to show up on people's television screens, being walked to school by their parents.
As a people.
Why are there
Is there a need for a Kansas
It's
state
not
flag or a
uniting.
Shawnee
It's,
Machines
the
flag?
Confederate
I mean,
flag wouldn't unite us as a people. I'm not saying yes or no to fly now. I'm saying neutral.
Yeah, no, it's good.
But you can still identify with it personally, your own personal opinions.
And screamed at by white people. The contrast could not have been more stark. The white people who were screaming were, the caricature is the people, working class people, you know, not terribly clean. Some of them obese, faces distorted with anger.
Your own personal opinions. When you fly that flag, you're not saying everyone around me, this is who we are. You're just saying I believe in certain things about this flag, and those things I want to exemplify those to everybody else.
I'll go here and then I'll go there.
I mean, I agree with that. I think you have every right to identify with it, but I think it's extremely bigoted and hateful to do that when you are like aware of what it stands for. And you can claim that it stands for states' rights, but if you like took a history class, I assume you know that states' rights in the context of the Civil War were about slavery. Sure, they were about other things, but they were majority about slavery. You took a history class, you know that. You're choosing to be bigoted, and I don't understand that.
Descendants was saying, we were always taught that our ancestor didn't fight to protect slavery, he fought for Virginia. So, what was the Civil War and the Confederate flag really about? And as opposed to listening to people, one of the things you can read is this phrase, read about is a phrase called the lost cause. And that's a suggestion that it wasn't really slavery, it was states' rights. Did we hear that from Ronald Reagan's advisors? That's what it was all about. And I have no complaint with that. It was about states' rights. It was about the right to own other human beings as slaves. It was about culture, and the culture was white supremacy. It was about those things that the people who say the monuments should stay up, it was about the things that they say it's about. It's just that their history is causing them to see heritage and culture in a way that is completely false. So I have an idea. If you want to know why the southern states left the Union and why they started the Civil War, why don't you just ask them? South Carolina, the election of a man to the high office of President of the United States whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. Mississippi, our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. A blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. They are telling you as clearly as they can, our entire economy is built on slavery, and if you take that away from us, we're going to end up with nothing but retail jobs. Louisiana, the people of the slaveholding states are bound together by the same necessity and determination to preserve African slavery. Alabama declared that the election of Lincoln cannot be regarded otherwise than a solemn declaration on the part of a great majority of the northern people of hostility to the South, her property, and her institutions. Her property were the human beings that they owned. And the institution was the institution of white supremacy and slavery. They are telling you as plainly as they can, and my question is, why are we so unwilling to listen? Why are we so unwilling to believe exactly what they're telling us? This is my favorite. All white men are, and of right ought to be, entitled to equal civil and political rights, that the servitude of the African race as it existing in the states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free, and is abundantly authorized and justified by the experience of mankind and the revealed will of the Almighty Creator. Do you think that they stopped believing this because the war was over? They are telling you as clearly as they can. At the South, and with our people, of course, slavery is the element of all value, and the destruction of that destroys all that is property. This is why we are willing to send our fathers and brothers and sons to make war on the North to try and separate our country. Because if we don't, you're taking away our very lifeblood. We need these slaves, and we are comfortable with it, and we thought you were too.
Colorado with a K as opposed to a C. Everybody was determined by the Grand Dragon. The governor, the state senators, city mayor, police chief, the sheriff.
It was almost 100 years ago, and here we are again with a similar environment, politically and socially.
It is a cautionary tale. If we are not in denial of the power of the Klan in Colorado, we are better set up to be more honest about ourselves and who we are now.
Other hate groups were flying the Confederate flag, but they were also flying the American flag. So I don't think that that's a valid argument at all in terms of like evolving the Confederate flag into racism, because if that was the case, then the American flag would also be known as racist.
During that racist, then apparently 56% of America is as well, because 56% of America is against changing the name of U.S. military bases.
The law of the United States.
That when we left Britain to come over here, we took land from the American Indians.
Yeah, I do know that.
And do you know that also that the flag that we fly also kind of stands for hatred, and that we took land from other people, and that we've been living in land that technically wasn't ours to take. So why are you only holding partial facts? Why are you only holding facts to the partial facts to the Southern flag when people fly this for freedom and they don't also fly it for people stealing from You fly that flag every day for freedom, but we can't because it only stands for slavery in your mind.
Key. And no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight and the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave. That is your national anthem, our national anthem. And my point is that from Plymouth Rock, white supremacy was the basis of how this country was formed. It doesn't mean that we're not a great country. It doesn't mean that we currently are all bigots. It means this is the truth about how our country was formed, and we can either deal with it realistically and as the truth, or we can keep trying to deny it. And in terms of keep trying to deny the nature of our true history, I feel like just saying, how's that working out for us?
Don't do that. What Drake does, and what all of you who wave the Confederate flag in front of any African-American students at East, you're condoning that, and you're openly telling them that you accept the racism that they have faced and continue to face by you. I know all of you that make fun of the "we too are East" thing. All of you do that. I hear you do it. It is absurd. And for you to sit here and be like, it's okay because of states' rights, and try to condone your own racist actions is absurd. Like, that is so ridiculous. And you can sit there and laugh at me, Drake, but you are being bigoted. And I think, like, the general American population that, like, is actually educated would agree with that. Maybe not all of us here at Shawnee Mission East that live in this bubble, but, like, I'm sorry that you're gonna continue.
Because this must be a really difficult time for them. This is the price you pay when you live a lie, when your view and understanding of history is based on a lie. Because when the truth comes to town, it really hurts when you're ripping that lie off. So, and on this topic, what was the Civil War fought about? And when people say, we were taught that he wasn't fighting for slavery, he was fighting for the South. It is the punishment of the South that its Robert Lees and Jefferson Davises will always be tall, handsome, and well-born. Their courage will be physical, not moral. Their leadership will be weak compliance with public opinion and never costly and unswerving revolt for justice and right. It is ridiculous to excuse Robert Lee as the most formidable agency this nation ever raised to make 4 million human beings chattel instead of men and women. Either he knew what slavery meant when he helped maim and murder thousands in its defense, or he did not. If he did not, he was a fool. If he did, Robert E. Lee was a traitor and a rebel, not a hero.
I find it ironic that people claim to be patriots when they fly that flag. The Confederates stabbed the Union in the back. They shot first, they murdered 500,000 American soldiers. And they argued that it was because of states' rights. I ask, states' rights to do what? What were we considering getting rid of at the time? Not guns, we weren't trying to raise taxes, it was slavery. We were trying to stop the expansion of slavery to the West. The Southern aristocracy panicked and left the Union. They said, we are not Americans, we are from the South, so we're starting our own country. And then they proceeded to launch numerous terrorist attacks against the Union, shooting at Fort Sumter, murdering 200 people in Lawrence, Kansas.
In almost every town in South Carolina, there's a monument to the Confederacy. This speaks more to us than just of the lost cause and the romanticism attendant to that, like every lost cause. But rather in South Carolina, perhaps speaks even more eloquently to the tradition we have for inherited memory, passing down those constant truths from generation to generation, from father to son and mother to daughter, which I think has served us well in this state. Let the stranger who may in future times read this inscription recognize that these were men whom power could not corrupt, whom death could not terrify, whom defeat could not dishonor. And let their virtues plead for just judgment of the cause in which they perished.
Southerners, back in the South, Southerners thought that slavery was their right. Now we think that health care is our right.
So you're likening slavery to Obamacare?
Well, we're talking about we're talking about big government, and we're talking about states' rights. You can compare the two.
Okay.
We're talking about what was moral then and now. Like maybe in 100 years.
Wait, let's go, Raymond.
Okay, so
Listen up.
I think what I'm getting from what Hayden said was that slavery was okay because they thought it was moral, but slavery was never moral. And so
This is one of the most amazing books you will ever see. Written in 1839, Slavery as It Is. And the only thing these people did was to go to newspapers, cut out articles about slavery, and put them in a book. That's why they called it Slavery as It Is. And so I want to show you the real Andrew Jackson, because he had a slave that ran away, and he wasn't having that. So he put an ad in the newspaper, stop the runaway, and he offered a $50 reward. That's not what I want to talk to you about. It's the end of this newspaper advertisement put in by Andrew Jackson near Nashville, state of Tennessee. And this is what it says. If you find that slave, $10 extra for every 100 lashes any person will give him, to the amount of 300. When people say folks didn't fight the Civil War about slavery, they weren't about defending slavery. This is years before the Civil War. This is slavery as it is. Everyone knew that this is what slavery was about. There weren't any questions about it. And that third one especially. And I want to give you a little bit more detail about that. But here's what our President of the United States has said about Andrew Jackson. And I'm going to read this. Had Andrew Jackson been a little bit later, you wouldn't have had the Civil War. He was a very tough person, but he had a big heart. And he was really angry that he saw what was happening with regard to the Civil War. He said, there's no reason for this. The problem with it is, the first problem, that Andrew Jackson was dead 16 years before the Civil War started. And I know it is. It's like, are you kidding me? But it's like as funny as a heart attack, because there are people who believe this. And this is part, you're saying like, oh, that's ridiculous, nobody believes that. We are in 2017 and we're having a debate about what the Civil War meant. If you think that who controls the past is not important, you are wrong. Think about the arguments that we're having in this country today, and it's because the past has been concealed.
The United States has evolved over the years. Our founding fathers made it so we could change. When the Union was trying to change the way slaves were treated, the Confederacy, as I said, stabbed us in the back and murdered 500,000 people. And to your argument that the Confederate flag didn't start out as racist, I disagree.
And if you're wondering what the Civil War was about, how about not listening to pundits from today or politicians from today? How about going back and listening to the people that actually fought that war and what they have to say? If we ain't fighting to keep slavery, then what the hell are we fighting for? So, these monuments. This publication is put out by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I would encourage you to get it. You can get it online. It has amazing information about the monuments that have been erected in America and where they are and when they were put up. So where are these monuments? Well, I think a map is probably the best way to show it. That's half the country. Those are the top 10 states with the most monuments. And here are some facts that come from their study. About 1,503 monuments, and they're still counting. They haven't gotten them all. 109 public schools, 80 counties, 9 official Confederate holidays, and 10 United States military bases. Can you imagine that at a United States of America military base housing U.S. soldiers that is named for a person whose glory came from being a traitor to the United States and killing U.S. soldiers? Why don't we have Osama bin Laden at the World Trade Center? That's the distribution in terms of Confederate states, border states, Union states, and then not a state during the Civil War. You can see where these monuments were built. And so if we're asking the question, why were these monuments built? One of the things that we want as we're thinking about the answer is, well, where were they built? Were they built in the North? Were they built in the West? Why were they only built in the South? When were these monuments built? There were 2 spikes between the end of the 1800s and about 1921, and then essentially during the Civil Rights Movement. These monuments weren't built right after the Civil War. These monuments weren't built by people who were directly related to and lived with the people that died in the war. These monuments were built by folks who never knew the men that they were lionizing. 1900 to 1921. You see there, and you won't be able to see the date, but it's 1896. That's Plessy versus Ferguson. And the thing about that is, what I'd like people just to think about when I talk about how white supremacy is so ingrained in American culture that we don't even recognize it anymore. Plessy versus Ferguson was more than 30 years after the Civil War. And I told you the South may have lost the war, but they won the peace. Plessy versus Ferguson said the concept of white supremacy, it's not just the social construct anymore. It is the law of the United States, handed down by the highest court in the land. There is no other way to think about separate but equal. We weren't good enough to be in the same places as the white folks were. Separate versus equal was a concept that was derived to try and keep former slaves as close to that state as was humanly possible.
I just think it was get rid of all of this oppression. I mean, you cannot understand how horrible it was to have to contemplate a trip south. And the third thing was freedom from fear of being injured in the South. But a trip to the South for a Northerner was fraught with peril because you were worried that you run a car run out of gas and some person would be violent to you and you have no recourse to the law because the law was totally unfair. And then once you got to the town where you were going to be, if you're wise, you had made arrangements to stay with friends because you couldn't stay at the local hotel. And there was often no public place to eat. Well, we want to be rid of all of that stuff.
With or against, Greg?
I do not agree with that at all.
And your reason why? He has a right to disagree, but
It was completely a war on northern aggression. North was making unconstitutional and unfair taxes on the South to promote northern manufacturers, because the South's main export was cotton. The Britain manufacturers were like doing better than the North, and so they were selling their goods cheaper here in the U.S. So the North had 5 times more population than the South, so all political votes would go in favor of the North, obviously. And so they voted to put a tariff, like the tariff of 1825 by John Quincy Adams. And that tariff put taxes and made promoted the northern industries while also degrading the southern economies, which is unfair. And they didn't want unconstitutional and unfair treatment, so that's why the South side believes.
So follow the money. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 took 100,000 adults and sent them on our version of the Long March. And you see how many of them died on that march. What this did to the Choctaw Indians in the Southeast was horrendous. And here's why they did it. Because they needed room for this. People may think, well, I have an understanding that slavery was somehow directly tied to cotton production, and cotton production was kind of important. I want to ask you to think about that in some different terms. And before we do that, let's talk about Andrew Jackson, who was the architect of the Indian Removal Act. And our president, once again, we talk about rewriting history. You can't diss Andrew Jackson. He's on the $20 bill. And if he's on the $20 bill and he's a horrible, horrible person, what does that mean? Does that mean we have to take him off the $20 bill? Does that mean we have to start thinking about why we put him there in the first place? I don't want to deal with that. He's a great president.
rationale.
In my views, the Confederate flag it's a flag on, it's a you can't push me anymore, I'm gonna retaliate. It's like the Gadsden flag from the Revolutionary War. The North, I feel that the North was doing unfair things to the South, unconstitutional things, and the flag was a symbol of like, you can only push me so far before I retaliate.
And do you not feel that the current American flag represents that right for you?
They are telling us as clearly as they can what they are about and why they're waving that flag. The party's purpose was clear. We stand for segregation of the races. This is from the editor of the Augusta, Georgia Courier in 1951. Folks, they are saying it as plainly as they can. And yet, we are still having a debate in this country about what this stuff means. So Brown versus the board in 54, and we all, those of us of a certain age anyway, remember some of these images. And I told you about Thurgood Marshall's argument to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, when we think about the legacy of white supremacy, we recognize that public schools in America are more segregated today than they were in 1954. That's not by mistake. That's not by accident. Understand that this is now 89 years after the Civil War. And this is the first time that the law in America, I'm not talking about the society and the social acceptance, but 89 years after the Civil War, it is the first time that the law in America says black folks are human enough that they can sit in the same classroom with us. Think about it. In 1619, there were 20 human beings that were brought to America as slaves. 20. And it all started from that. Because what people figured out very quickly is if you have free labor, the profits that you can make go up exponentially. The first slave ship is built in Massachusetts, not in the South. So this whole thing about, well, it was the bad South and the good North when it came to slavery. No, no, no. America went in all hands on deck. And I'm asking you to look at these laws because these laws will help you understand what slavery was about. What we have here is we know the white slave owners will be raping the black women, but their kids are not going to be free. Let's make that clear right here and right now. We're going to steal their God from them, but even if they accept our God, they're still slaves. When you look at that one, and I think about policing in America today, it sends chills up and down my spine. And look at what you can get executed for. Growing your own food, learning to read, and assembling in groups. I remember talking to my great-grandmother who was born to parents that were slaves. And I remember her saying, we had to be very careful not to show how smart we really were.
Whether they're misinformed or not, that they may feel offended.
Because South Heritage had slavery. I mean, that's a fact. That's probably why they're offended.
Wait, let them finish the conversation.
When the war wasn't about slavery, I can't help that history teachers are teaching that. I can't control that.
And I remember her saying, we had to be very careful not to show how smart we really were, because a smart black person was a threat.
Ms. Holloway, do you think that the history teachers here at East are biased because the government that they're running on was the one who won? Because I talked
that's the dumbest argument I've ever heard.
All right, okay. I talked to a 15-year military history teacher at Fort Leavenworth, and he said that the teachers are completely biased, and he told me the real story. And so do you think that what you've heard in the history classrooms at Shawnee Mission East are a little bit skewed from what really happened?
Okay, no, because like I asked you, and if you know.
But do you know what really happened?
If I know, I asked you to tell me what really happened. I asked you if you that the Civil War started beside slavery, and you couldn't do it. You just looked at me. So please tell me the whole story.
You said that before you were here.
Yeah, you came late.
Yeah, but I asked.
I'll give a rundown again if you want. You want me to?
Yeah.
Oh God, here we go. All right, so the northern manufacturers, right?
Yeah.
In Britain, hang on. You got me laughing.
Let the man.
Go ahead.
All right, so Britain was selling their goods in America for lower prices than the North was, right?
Okay.
So the North had 5 times more population than the South. South's main exporter was cotton and tobacco. And so the South would make most of their money off shipping their cotton to Britain. And the North manufacturers, they made the tariff of 1825, which put a import and export tax on cotton, which would raise prices of northern goods, but it would hurt the southern economy because they would then tax the cotton that goes out to Britain. It was unconstitutional and unfair.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
You said the 2 major crops were what?
Cotton and tobacco.
And how did they harvest them at a high level without prices being attached? Like, what was their main way of harvesting them?
Probably slavery. The cotton gin was.
How much did they pay the slaves? I'm just asking the question. I mean, if their main 2 crops were cotton and tobacco, and they used free labor, so they made a lot of profit off of it. This is just economics. Then how do you take out the fact that slavery was attached?
All right. Well, I have a question for Mr. Justice then.
You brought up an economics debate. Your argument was economics. If they made the majority of their profit off of free labor to be able to send out that cotton and that tobacco to everybody at a cheaper price and make a lot of profit because they don't have to pay the labor, then how can you detach the labor that did it?
Well, if we want to talk about labor, first of all,
We can break away from the North and it's economically feasible. And here's why. Everybody depends on our cotton. We can shut down the mills in the North in a heartbeat. Britain and France are going to have to make a decision. Will they support us militarily? Because we can cut down their mills. We just won't send them our cotton. It couldn't have been more practically and beautifully stated than it was by Senator Henry Hammond of South Carolina. Without firing a gun, without drawing a sword, should they make war on us, we could bring the whole world to our feet. What would happen if no cotton was furnished for 3 years? England would topple headlong and carry the whole civilized world with her, save the South. No, you dare not make war on cotton. No power on earth dares to make war upon it, because cotton is king. Follow the money. This is how important cotton was. What kind of money are we talking about? 1840, cotton made 59% of all U.S. exports. This is 15 years before the Civil War. 1.5 million pounds with about 700,000 slaves, and you can see how that changed. 2.25 billion pounds and almost 4 million slaves. This is what made America wealthy. This was the formation of wealth. And folks, I just want to make sure as a side note to say, I hope you don't think that the money made from slavery just dissolved and went up into the air. It went into companies and businesses, and not even tracing and blaming those corporations. Those corporations hired people and paid their salaries and their benefits and gave them the ability to raise families and to pass wealth on through the generations. This money is what made America financially stable. The market value of slaves in 1860 was greater than the market value of every railroad, factory, and bank combined. Follow the money, because the money we're talking about was huge. Think about the role of slaves and trade and slave labor in the economy. And that's a statistic that shocks me, because the Mississippi Valley today is one of the poorest places in America. And in 1860, more millionaires per capita than any other place in the country. And that was because
from the fact that the Supreme Court had finally said, and blacks interpreted this 54 decision to mean the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution include us. Just as we've always said, all God's children are equal. And so we started to move. And white people thought that's right. And a lot of white people joined in.
You sound like you're talking about sort of the continuation of the Civil War, the way you describe it, or it's like
segregation, and the legalized oppression of black people was a continuation by the white South of the Civil War. That's exactly what it was. It was taking out on black people their venom against the white Northerners, and saying, you may think that you took our way of life away from us, but you're wrong, and your foolish social theories are wrong too. So it was a continuation of the Civil War, there's no question about it.
In 1925, the Klan flourishes in Colorado.
The Klan was prominent throughout the state and had a chapter clavern in all 64 counties.
The original Klan, right after the Civil War, for 6 or 7 years in the South, was a crucial force for forcing black subordination. And then there's the Klan of the 1920s, which is more or less nationwide. And then in our time, there is a recreated third round of the Klan.
We need to study the KKK for the simple reason that the terror that they inflicted on this country in the past is not revisited in the present and doesn't move forward in the future.
Fortunately, we later dealt with that problem. Oh,
We never fix the problems, we only fix the things that are fine.
Oh, one of the reasons American history is so important to me is I want us as a country to summon the courage to deal seriously with our problems. Sometimes I think that we're just so cowardly, like we're the cowardliest country on earth.
What about Fred? What I'm stressing is that you guys are misinformed about the flag's origins. You're saying that it's racist, but the flag is not a racist thing. It's been molded by our society to be looked at as a racist thing, when really it's not.
Okay, so I opportunity for a lot of you to think about it at least. And I think that there's a lot of you in here that could stand to think about it, on both sides. I think that this is a really good opportunity for a lot of you to think about it at least. I think you should be allowed to have it on your car. If you're going to make that decision, then I think you should be ready for the repercussions, and I think you should really think about what kind of a person you're portraying yourself to be.
I don't care. I'm just don't.
That's your right.
Yeah, I don't care. But if you're gonna really get mad about it.
And now we have this. And it's funny, except it's not. Our history is being stolen from us. Historical black universities and colleges, pioneers of school choice. Living proof that when more options are provided to students, they are afforded greater access and greater quality. And now the president is saying we're going to have to stop federal funding to these schools because that would be racist. I want to laugh when I read this, but what I remember is this is the tactic that was used by the South to rewrite history about what the Civil War meant. The reason they are doing it now is because it has worked in the past, and it will continue to work unless we're going to do something about it. Think about this. George Washington owned slaves. He absolutely did. The Washington Monument, if you go to Washington, D.C. and look at it, it's got nothing to do with slavery or the Civil War on it anyway. I think what he was honored for was, forming the country, being the first president. The fact that he owned slaves, you are absolutely right, and I'm going to talk about that. But that monument is not a monument to fighting, killing others, and being willing to die yourself so that you can enslave people and treat them as chattel. That's the difference between the Washington Monument and the Jefferson monuments and the monuments that I'm going to talk about. How many people in this room have ever owned a slave? I see no hands. Robert E. Lee's family, the people that exist today, they never owned slaves either. Slavery is not our fault. We have no responsibility for it. It is part of our shared history. And that's what we can't walk away from.
That integration for us meant freedom from oppression. I don't think that black people really thought of joining the country club or this or that. They thought, get rid of this humiliation. First of all, get some equal education for our children. That everybody knew. That was a goal. Get equal education because that's our future. But don't tell me I can't go to the bathroom anymore. Don't tell me I can't sit anywhere on the bus or in the theater. Don't tell me that. It's just too terrible.
And I'd just like you to consider this. This is Dr. King in 1955. We must love our enemies, be good to them. This is what we must live by, and we must meet hate with love. We must love our white brothers no matter what they do to us. This is Dr. King in 1967. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. Most of all, alienate it from society. And knowing society cherishes property above people, the rioters are shocking it by abusing property rights. That's not a speech that is brought out in Martin Luther King week either. And on the night he was killed, April 4th, 1968, he was writing a sermon that was found in the briefcase in his room at the Lorraine Motel. And this is the title of the sermon he was going to give 3 days later. This is what was happening.
I'm just afraid that I don't think you're understanding that they are personal.
We get it. When the terrorist shooting in Orlando happened, I was horrified by that carnage. And I thought, you know, I don't even have the adjectives to try and describe what people who were victimized there must have felt. But I have to tell you that I started getting angry when I heard them describe it as the largest mass terrorist shooting in American history. Now, if you hear news reports about it today, most of them have been modified. And what they say is it's the largest mass shooting by one person in American history. Because what came to mind for me were these.
Offended because I want to know that you know that they are and why they are. So I want to say that.
Why do you think she asked a specific question, so you should answer the question?
Because they're misinformed about
The fact that this was normal, the fact that this was behavior that didn't really shock anybody, tells you something about how deeply white supremacy has been ingrained into American culture. He took the American flag. He took the Holy Bible. He took an unsheathed sword, and he took a cross. And he made himself the new imperial wizard of the KKK. That's what Stone Mountain, Georgia is. It is a monument to the KKK. Now, its history is interesting. That's what it looks like. It is the largest bas relief in the world. Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Conceived in 1912 by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, deeded to the United Daughters in 1916. They started working on it with the KKK in 1922, but it was abandoned for 36 years until the state of Georgia purchased it and created the Stone Mountain Memorial Association to complete the project, and it was completed in 1972. They are saying it to you as plainly and as directly as they can. And so the people today who say the folks honored in these monuments were not fighting for slavery, my response is, I understand that that's what you want to believe. And I understand how difficult it is to wrap your mind around the fact that human beings, fellow Americans, would fight, kill other people, and die to preserve slavery. It's really hard to wrap your mind around that. But that is the ugly truth. If you read that quote from Abraham Lincoln, I was raised to understand that Abraham Lincoln was my savior. I was taught that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves because he knew that slavery was an abomination. Abraham Lincoln said on many occasions, if I could preserve the Union and keep slavery, I'd do it. If getting rid of slavery is what it takes to preserve the Union, I'll do that too. What his goal was to preserve the Union. And I just want you to know that the debate about reparations for slavery is a completely false debate. First of all, go back to 1988 when Ronald Reagan was in office. Passed with almost no dissent was a bill giving $20,000 to every Japanese American family that was interned during World War II. That was absolutely appropriate. $20,000 doesn't even begin to compensate those families for what was taken from them, for what they lost, and for being essentially imprisoned for the term of World War II. At least it was some acknowledgement that what we did was wrong. If you talk about reparations for slavery, $20,000 for 4 years of internment, what is it for 256 years of slavery? And here is the kicker. Reparations were already paid because in the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln set aside $1 million for DC slave owners to be compensated for loss of property. This is our history. Important as the soul is to the body, and without it, no house can gain a proper stability. And you're like, Jeff, that's 1784, a long time ago. Bear with me. 40 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence owned other human beings. The founding fathers of America had absolutely, positively no problem with white supremacy. They believed in it. It was the truth. It was the reality of their time. And they weren't embarrassed to say it. Several years ago, I heard people on TV saying, this was one of the greatest movies ever made in the history of American film. And look at the advertisement, a stupendous motion picture employing the services of 18,000 people, accompanied by a symphony orchestra of 40. Film and art does give you an idea of where a country is and what a culture values. And this was one of the greatest hits of American culture at the time. How great? Well, it was 3 years in production. And many people don't know that this was the first movie that was ever filmed in the White House. Woodrow Wilson had this film shown in the White House. And the film, it didn't have any black actors, of course. They just put blackface on white actors to play the role of the evil black scourge. This is what President Woodrow Wilson had to say. The white housed by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. That is the President of the United States. And he is speaking to a populace in America that's saying, we get it.
Honestly, I think like if you ever take a history class, they tell you that this part of our history is like a shameful part, and I think it should be left in the past because it's kind of irrelevant now.
I don't know if y'all remember the Traveling Wilburys. Great, great band. And one of their songs had this verse, and the walls came down all the way to hell, and I saw them when they're standing, and I saw them when they fell. Well, we have seen these monuments stand for way too long. And as I said, taking these monuments down will not feed a hungry person. It will not release anybody from jail. It will not solve the problems of race. But it is one way that we can at least begin to say we are going to deal honestly with what our past is, so that we at least have a fighting chance to move forward in a way that actually makes words like justice and equality mean something instead of sounding like a soundbite that makes us feel good.
The thing is, we evolved. The United States has evolved over the years. Our founding fathers made it so we could change.